one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now. We're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we are moving from here. Make no mistake, no, we ain't giving up no mountain.
All right. Hey, guess what? Good evening to all of you as we prepare for today's program. AWI, as we call it, Anansi Web Education. And our operator has signaled, thank you so much, Lemon, has signaled that former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, uh, retired brigadier, is with us, and the operator will prepare to ensure that the former president is with us this evening to talk about this evening. We are talking about something that of big, huge interest, and it has to do with Venezuela. Venezuela. We will be talking about that. So enjoy this song, "Not a Blade of Grass," quite timely, while we prepare to have former President David Arthur Granger with us. We'll be right back.
We are a peaceful people, struggling we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not the one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now. We're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here.
All right, welcome back to AWI, Anansi Web Education. This evening we have former President David Arthur Granger with us. I can just imagine that Mr. Granger was just singing "Not a Blade of Grass," not a blade of grass. How important is that song, Mr. Granger, at this point in time, "Not a Blade of Grass"? And what's your memory of that song? What's the story behind it, if you can briefly, before we get into tonight's program?
The song emerged. Well, thank you very much for having me on this program tonight, and greetings to all viewers and listeners. That song, at one stage, almost became a national anthem in the early 1980s. I recall that, well, of course, the crisis with Venezuela became a national concern since 1966, when the Venezuelans occupied the island of Ancoco. But in 1970, the government of Guyana at that time, under Forbes Burnham, was able to reach a moratorium with the government of Venezuela. And it was called the Protocol of Port of Spain. But after that protocol was due to expire in 1982, tension rose under the Venezuelan President Luis Herrera campaigns. And that song became a rallying cry. It was simple, it was Creole, it was catchy, and it was educational. And many Guyanese may not know the details of the controversy, but they know that song very much, that we aren't budging, we're not giving up our land. And my recollection, it was composed by Dave Martins, And my recollection is that it came up in early 1980s. I cannot say exactly what year, but it was certainly sung by the Trade Winds, a group that was managed by Dave Martin. And as I said, people probably knew Not a Blade of Grass more than the national anthem at that time. So that is my recollection. It's very powerful and it is very memorable. And most of the people who were around at that time in the 1980s would remember it.
Of course, I do remember that. And we are walking right into tonight's program, which has to do with a little bit of the Venezuelan issue. But before we do, let's give you guys another 30 seconds clip of Not a Blade of Grass. Quite timely. And I repeat, Not a Blade of Grass.
And they lived and died here, and we are moving from here. Make no mistake, no, we ain't giving up no mountain, no, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not one blue saki, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass.
All right, Not a Blade of Grass, not one chorus, coming out there from the Trade Winds. Indeed, our very own Dave Martin. And for those of you, just a reminder that on December 1st, that is Friday, December 1st, in Brooklyn at the Woodbine Ballroom, they will have Not a Blade of Grass, an event to discuss the Venezuela-Guyana issue, the situation there. So we'll announce that a little more. You will get to see some flyers and so forth. But let's get straight into today's topic with the former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, David Arthur Granger. And today, as we have there, the influx of Venezuelan migrants to Guyana started as a trickle, but has now swollen to a torrent. It is estimated, and I want you guys to take a look at this. It is estimated that there are about 40,000, I repeat, 40,000 Venezuelan born migrants in Guyana, a number that exceeds Guyana-born residents of the Barima Waini region, which is region number one, where many migrants have settled. However, several families have been reported to be subsisting in informal settlements in every region. Mr. Granger, we'll start off at that. Let us get a quick introduction before we get right into our first question. Or should we just get straight into the first question?
Let's go straight into the questions.
Absolutely. So the first question here has to do with why has there been such massive migration of Venezuelans into Guyana, sir?
There are certainly push factors and pull factors. The main push factor is that the situation in Venezuela, in terms of the economy and the quality of life, has deteriorated under President Maduro drastically. And we may complain about 40,000 migrants, but in fact, Venezuela has lost 6 million migrants. And countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil have been hardest hit. Of course, we are small. Even Trinidad and Tobago, I think, have been hit by the migration. But the push factor is the collapse or the deterioration of the Venezuelan services, social services, and the economy. Although it was one of the richest countries on the continent, because of economic mismanagement, the quality of life, it is still potentially rich. It has still got the biggest reserves of petroleum in the hemisphere. But the mismanagement of the government, mismanagement of the economy led to a massive migration. And coming from the eastern Venezuela, it is just a matter of a boat trip. And many of the people who have come here are of Warao descent, a tribal group called the Warao, which are cousins. They're not identical to the Warao in Guyana, but it's just a boat trip or sometimes you can cross the river. There's a river called the Amakura River, and in dry season as we have now, people could just come across. So it is easy, and the push factor is that the Venezuelan economy is in dire straits. It is capable of recovering, and Venezuela is capable of becoming a very rich country. But on the other side, there's the pull factor that on the 21st of December, 2019, it seems like a long time now, almost 4 years ago, I declared Guyana to become a petroleum state. I declared the 21st of December National Petroleum Day. And by becoming a petroleum state, like sharks sense blood in the water, we started to attract people from all around. And certainly the Venezuelans knew that if they were hungry or destitute, here you have a petroleum state called Guyana, and this has been a factor. On the on the negative side, there had always been some degree of laxity, especially in government's permissive attitude to indigenous migration, because all across the western frontier, indigenous groups have been split by colonial boundaries. And as I said, there were Rao in Venezuela, there were Rao in Guyana. They're Makushi in Venezuela. In Brazil, they're Makushi in Guyana. They're Wapishana in Brazil, they're Wapishana in Guyana. So it was easy, and very frequently, the government law enforcement agency never attempted to stop indigenous people from crossing. Trafficking is different, but just going across to meet relatives or to have to join in indigenous festivals and so on. So there's a push factor and there's the pull factor. And the pull factor is that Guyana was accommodating, Guyana had become a petroleum state, and the government of the day did not seem to care one way or the other. When AP and UAFC got into office, we quickly moved to create the Department of Citizenship to control and manage the migration. But before that, it was just a very permissive atmosphere, laissez-faire, and people came and went. Of course, it allowed criminality to function, transnational crimes to function. So we tried, in the AP and UAFC, we tried to manage the process, but those were the factors which contributed to the migration. One, the push factor, and secondly, the pull factor, that Guyana was the place to go. It was the destination that could give them food, and it was becoming an oil state.
Lots and lots of that indeed. If you're now joining us, we're dealing with the influx of Venezuelan migrants to Guyana, and 40 plus thousand. The first question we dealt with, President Granger answered, was why has there been such massive migration of Venezuelans into Guyana? And this takes us now, Mr. Granger, to our second question. How prepared is Guyana to manage migration of this scale? Now, before, Mr. Granger, let us just take the time out to welcome our new listeners and those of you who are joining us, whether in Guyana or around the world. Good from other parts of the world. Good evening to all of you. Now, the second question, Mr. Granger, just to repeat it, how prepared is Guyana to manage migration of this?
When the APNU got into office in May 2015, we knew there was a problem, and the problem was not being managed. And we established a Department of Citizenship and appointed a minister who had to report to cabinet. Migration is a problem all around the world. There's migration through Libya in North Africa, migration from Somalia, migration from Syria, and we felt that we were not immune. And the creation of the Department of Citizenship was, I would say, I wouldn't call it a master stroke, but it was the response. It was a reasonable and logical response, that a minister of the government should be put in charge of this massive operation. It shouldn't be left to a few public servants, and it shouldn't become a matter of ad hocery. So we were in the process of preparing, and in addition to other policies that we had for social protection and the introduction of the concept of social cohesion, we didn't invent it, but apparently nowadays some people are afraid or embarrassed to use the term. But we paid a lot of attention to these important social issues because it was part of migration, because we did not resist, we did not build a wall like another country did. We built bridges. We didn't build barriers. We built bridges so that people will come in, but they must be treated fairly and they must comply with the law. Uh, so we were prepared, I would say, better prepared 7 years ago than we are now. We had a minister, we had the Department of Citizenship, we set up a coordinating committee, and we had excellent relations with the International Organization of Migration and the United Nations Commission for Refugees. NGOs were all part of it. It was inclusive. Um, and uh, the numbers kept going because another thing we did is that we strengthened the military and police deployment on the borders. As you may know, at one stage, the entire hinterland, comprising nearly 75% of our territory, was under one police division. Old timers would know about F division, but our administration divided the hinterland into four divisions. Region 1, Barima Waini, is now a police division. Region 7 is a police division. Region 8 is a police division. Region 9 is a police division. So instead of having this big glob of guava jelly, you had senior police commanders who were responsible for each division for the first time. Instead of somebody sitting down in Ivlery trying to control the whole hinterland, we now had people who were resident. So we did this. We established a corps of wardens, and we took hinterland development seriously. We set up, which legally, of course, we created uh, four towns in the hinterland. Mabaruma ceased to be a village. It had its own municipality. Bartica had its own municipality. Mali had its own municipality and its own town council. Lethem had its own municipality. So the local government structure, the regional structure, the police structure were all strengthened. Um, Now, of course, the administration came in and started to throw the baby in the bathwater. It dissolved the Department of Social Cohesion. The minutes the coordinating committee stopped meeting. And I have noticed in the news that very frequently, at the height of crises, the army and police, instead of wearing green and going onto the borders to protect our villages, are wearing blue and cleaning up, doing municipal functions, with buckets and brooms, cleaning up the medians and Mandela Avenue. So I would say that the measures and mechanisms that were introduced by APNU AFC after 2015 were relaxed or dissolved, and this has impaired the ability of the administration to manage migration on this scale. But of course, the migration was once a trickle, and we had put measures in place. But now it has become a torrent. So by removing the measures, the situation is worse than before. And I would say that the government is not as ready now. The PPP Civic Administration is not as ready now as as the APNU administration was ready 5 or 6 years ago. So I'd say that the management has been diminished, and we are we are unready. We are unready. We don't know where the people are. People are getting involved in crime. Murders are being committed. Trafficking is taking place, and squatting is popping up. Like zombie umbrellas all over in all of the regions. In all of the regions. I mean, you have people coming in from Venezuela finding themselves in East Bank Essequibo, finding themselves in East Bank Demerara. It is, I think chaotic might be a mild expression, but definitely the migration is being, maybe it was underestimated, but it is now being mismanaged. And better needs to be done. There have been numerous complaints. International organizations are serving warnings. The ILO is warning, the the International Office of Migration is warning, the IMF is warning, but the government seems to be deaf, and they're not listening to international organizations which are warning that the problem is not being adequately managed. And worst of all, the government is not telling the people the truth. They are interested in issuing ID cards and people voting in 2025. That's not the problem. The problem is here and now. The problem is, what do we do with 40,000 migrants? Do we feed them? Do we set up, do we just give them hampers? Uh, is there going to be some settlement? Is there going to be some plan to integrate these people into the country? So I would say that many Guyanese do not know the size of the problem, and the government is not telling them the full truth about the gravity of the situation.
Well said. Lots of people seem to share that view that the current administration is not telling the whole truth. They're not telling the truth about this Venezuelan migrant situation at all. And there seemed to be this widespread perception of the regime not handling this properly at all. And it can very well backfire. This takes us now to the next and final question, and it has to do with what social impact on the frontier villages such as Baramita and Whitewater. Mr. Granger, what is the likely social impact on this, please?
Well, to start with, many of the people who should know better do not understand the gravity of the problem. You simply cannot allow 40,000 people into a region where the national population is just 26,000 without consequences. There are consequences. To start with, the Warao. Although we have Warao in Guyana, they are not cut from the same cloth as the Warao who are coming from Venezuela. I mean, as president, I have been to some communities in which Guyanese Warao children do not even go to school because they can't understand the teachers speaking English. And the teachers can't speak Warao, and the children cannot speak English. So if this has been happening among Guyanese, you can imagine what happens when the Venezuelans come in. And the Warao are basically, there are pictures with them, some with arrows and bows, scavenging in garbage dump, foraging for food. No Guyanese Warao would do that. So there's a big cultural gap. And of course, many, at least half of the 40,000 are women, and there are other social problems, the problems of disease. So we have to look at the social impact of the absence of integration, absence of planning for such a large number, absence of management, and the people will suffer. We have done surveys of residents of Borima Waini, and they're worried. about the size of the migration is not comfortable. And I wouldn't say that violence will break out, but many of them have always been suspicious of the Venezuelan because of the crime. Some villages have been killed, and miners are being killed by what is called a sindicato. They're not really sindicato, but that's the name which is stuck. But they're Venezuelan gangs. Sometimes they're rogue Venezuelan soldiers. They've been shooting in the Cuyuni River. So there is a very, it's, we're nervous neighbors. We're not friendly. And we're in the middle of diplomatic and territorial confrontation. And this is the worst possible time for any sort of migration when we're in the middle of such a confrontation. So the social impact is likely to be a slow burning fuse that will eventually cause an explosion when some of these babies grow up. We don't know if they're dual citizens. We hear talk from the government about issuing ID cards. Maybe they have an eye on the 2025 elections, but the impact, the political expectations might be undermined by the social impact. That is, the people who are coming just don't fit in, and they have problems, and the problems are not being dealt with. There are problems of feeding, there are problems of housing, there are problems of education, there are problems of health. And we feel that there's no single agency, there's no single minister who can say, I am responsible. It's difficult for the foreign minister to manage a migration of 40,000. It's difficult for the Ministry of Home Affairs to manage this. And it's just being unmanaged or non-managed. So the social impact is what is going to happen to Guyanese families in those regions. What is happening? What's going to happen to the tranquil social relations among the people of the Northwest, who are accustomed to a certain standard of living, a certain lifestyle? It will be damaged, it will be impaired by this massive migration. And it is starting to happen in the villages because, we see instead of the soldiers and policemen being deployed to protect these villages from intruders and from violent migrants, like the sindicatos, we see them doing a lot of municipal chores on the coast. So the problem, I don't know if the problem is being ignored, but certainly the problem is not going away. So the government, if they wish, they can turn a blind eye to the sufferings of the villagers. And I'm concerned about the villagers. That's why I went there. I'm concerned about Whitewater. I'm concerned about Baimite. I'm concerned about Kaikan. I'm concerned about Arau. And if the government doesn't go there and assure the villagers that they are going to be safe, and if the army and police are not deployed there to reassure our citizens along the border, this can have a frightening effect, or it has already had a frightening effect. People are nervous.
People are nervous indeed about the entire situation, and I'm glad that President David Arthur Granger was able to put that in a nutshell for us, explaining the Venezuelan migrant situation. And it's said to be at some 40,000. It could possibly be more. Who knows? Obviously, with what we're seeing, there's no control of the migrants. There's anybody can just cross into Guyana, and that's it. And the regime, those who are heading this regime, they seem to be turning a blind eye on the situation. As President Granger said, the Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs cannot handle a situation. Ministry of Home Affairs cannot handle a situation. And nobody seems to be handling the situation the correct way. And so we are where we are. Those of you who joined us a little late, 3 questions were answered here. One, Why has there been such massive migration of Venezuelans into Guyana? The second question, how prepared is Guyana to manage migration of this scale, a large scale, mind you? And the final question, just answered by President Granger, is what is the likely social impact on frontier villages such as Baramita and Whitewater? It is indeed a very, very scary situation. And those in the regime, they're not doing anything to help with that. Mr. Granger, as always, we are very thankful for your time, especially from your busy schedule. I know we will continue to deal with this matter, maybe next week as well, because the people want to hear, they want to know. They are nervous. Guyanese are nervous. Other than what we're hearing, registration for voters' ID cards with the Venezuelan migrants and all manner of things we're hearing, people are afraid. Mr. Granger, again, thank you. Unless you have a minute, any closing remarks until we meet again next Saturday?
I must emphasize that the migration of Venezuelans into Ghana is the most massive migration since the end of East Indian immigration over 100 years ago. It is a very serious matter, and I think all residents are concerned. We don't want our border villages to be jittery and to be scared. And I just urge the government of Ghana to be more responsible and to be more and to communicate more readily and more frequently with the Guyanese population because they feel threatened. And I think this is the message that we must send. We need to educate our population, but at the same time, the government needs to organize its administration better so that we could be confident that the migration problem is going to be resolved in a very short period of time. Thank you.
Arden, again, thank you so much, Mr. Granger, as always, for your time. And to all of our listeners, whether they are in Guyana, outside of Guyana, wherever you guys are, we appreciate your time. Continue to have where it is remaining of tonight and a blessed week ahead. Thank you all so much as we close off with this, as Mr. Granger referred to earlier. At one point, it appeared to have been the national anthem of Guyana, not a blade of grass. Timely indeed, not a blade of grass. Folks, don't forget December 1st. It's a Friday from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. in Brooklyn there. Listen to some of those speakers out there. Thank you all so much. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Granger, for your time.
Good night.
We are a peaceful people, struggling, we struggle. And we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a